be prepared to use it, just select Git. That's the default option there. And you can go ahead and create and edit this project. Hi, my name is Michael, and welcome to my 2D action and adventure RPG tutorial series. We are learning how to build a top-down 2D game that features action, adventure, and light RPG mechanics all in Godot 4 using GDScript. In this video, we're going to start our new project, get a little bit familiar with Godot 4, and create a simple moving character that we can build our game around. If you're already somewhat familiar with Godot, you may want to jump ahead to the next video where we'll get into the nitty-gritty of building a state machine for our player, but if you're brand new, then this is the place to start. So first off, I've got my Godot engine project manager here, so as soon as you open Godot, this is what you're going to see the first time, and you can see I've got multiple projects. But let's go ahead and click the new project button here. Do you click a button? And what you're going to have to do is figure out where you want to save this and what you want to call it. I'm going to call my project AARPG, Action Adventure RPG there. And I've navigated to a folder here. I'm going to say create folder. It creates the unique folder name that matches it. And hopefully you're using version control. If you don't know what that means, then you can worry about it later. But if you don't use it and you want to be prepared to use it, just select Git. That's the default option there. And you can go ahead and create and edit this project. Just select Git. That's the default option there. And you can go ahead and create and edit this project. Godot is going to launch that for you. And when Godot starts up, you're going to be greeted with this blank 3D scene, or it could be a 2D scene. We're going to see a few things. Obviously, there's the main viewport here where you're editing your project. You've got your file system, which shows you your file structure, your folders, your assets. And then we've got the scene tree panel, which displays everything that's in your scene. And then on the right side, there's the inspector. So we're going to kind of go through a few of these panels and areas and understand how to use them today. But first, let's set up our basic scene. And because we're building a 2D action RPG and I'm going to do a pixel art style, there's a couple things I want to do here. So first, you can see since we've got an empty scene and it doesn't even know what type it is, it wants us to create a root node. So in Godot, we've got scenes and nodes. Scenes are essentially a collection of nodes, and nodes are objects or entities that are used in the Godot engine to build our game. So I'm going to select 2D scene, and boom, there you go. We can see it says node 2D. And while we're building this game, we're going to maybe have some scenes that are just kind of for testing purposes. And I'm going to go ahead and rename this node here. You can double click on the name, or you can press F2. I'm going to call it Playground. And I just like to call my scenes Playground when I'm just playing around with them. So now that I've got this base node called Playground, you can see it's now a 2D view. I lost that 3D grid. This scene is where we're going to start dumping our player as we begin our first steps in creating this project. And you'll see that our scene tree now just has one node, and as we begin building, we're going to see this grow. So since we want to create our player today, let's go ahead and start by adding a new node. There's two ways to do this. You can, or a couple ways, maybe three. There's a plus button up here to add a child node. You'll see that there's a shortcut, Control and A. You can also select a node and right click on it and say add child node. And that's handy if you want to add a node as a child of a specific node. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, which brings up the create new node dialog in Godot. And you can see there's a lot of options here. We can expand these and try and find what we need. And for 2D game, a lot of what we need is going to be underneath this node 2D. So essentially how you can think of it is this is a basic 2D node, and then there's more specialized types of 2D nodes underneath it. And this can get even more and more specialized depending on our needs. And what we want to start with is a character body 2D. And had we known that to begin with, you could actually just type that in the search here. You see as I start to type character body 2D appears. And I'm going to go ahead and select that and click create. And so now you can see in our scene tree, the playground now has a child node called character body 2D. And this is what we're going to use to start making our character, our player character. Now, the first thing you'll notice is we don't really see much on screen except this little red crosshair. And we've got a little warning, it says that this node has no shape, so it can't collide or interact with other objects. Consider using a collision shape or a collision polygon 2D as a child to define its shape. And I think consider
is a nice gentle reminder that this doesn't work without
available. Hi, is Beth available?
Who's speaking?
Hi, I'm Deanna calling from Cool Wizard on a recorded line to go over Beth's auto insurance quote.
Beth who?
Beth Carberry.
Who?
Do you have the wrong number?
Yeah, please stop
Oh,
calling.
sorry about that.
Beth Chowdhury. Beth Chowdhury? What the fuck?
one of those.
So let's go ahead and right click here, add a child node, and I'm going to type in collision. There we go, collision shape 2D.
What the fuck? You know, I should mute myself. But I've already fucking talked, so...
Select that and click create. And we have yet one more warning, and it's simply that this collision shape doesn't know what kind of shape it is. So this is where we'll use this inspector panel on the right side. So you can see that the collision shape is a child of the character body. The collision shape needs a shape. And for this character, we're going to just be simple. We're going to click where it says empty, click new circle shape, and call it good. And I'm going to zoom in on this so you can see. So now there's this new collision shape, this circle, in our character body. And that defines, you know, where the character is going to bump into stuff. And we can change this as needed later. I think a circle will be pretty good for the most part as we're starting out. Now, one thing you can do when you're working on your project is you can run the scene. There's a couple ways to do that. You're going to get familiar with this. You can run the current scene, which is this playground that we're working on. You'll notice it says unsaved. It doesn't have a name yet. You can also just click this play run project button or press F5. So I don't know if I said it's F6 to run the current scene, F5 to just run the project. I'm going to go ahead and press F5 on the keyboard. You can see that no main scene has been defined, but since we have one open, it's asking if we want to use the current one. I'll go ahead and do that. And now we need to save it because it's not been saved. So I'll just save this in the root directory of my project. It's called Playground already because I renamed the node. Press save and the project will run. And of course we don't see anything because all we've done is add a character body and a collision shape, and neither of these items will render visibly in the scene. These are all items that are, or nodes that are used to help understand collision for our character, but they don't render anything to the screen. A sprite to our character. Since we're making a 2D game and 2D games will render sprites or tile maps for our visuals, we'll go ahead and add a sprite as a child to the character body 2D. So I'll right click, get this dialog back up, type in sprite, and select sprite 2D. There we go. Nice little smiley face there. Now this requires a texture. So if you already have a character texture that you want to use, you can grab that and use it now. Or if you need one, you can look in the description, and I've linked an itch.io page where I'm providing assets that will be needed to get you started on this project. And actually, before I put a texture in here, I want to do a little bit of organization. In my scene tree, I'm going to come here, I'm going to right click on the root folder, click create new folder. I'm going to actually create a folder called player. And this is where I will organize all of my assets that are required to create my player. There's a lot of different ways to organize and structure the file system and the files in a project. This is just how I like to do it. You can do what you want. I'm actually going to create one more folder underneath player, and I'm going to call it sprites. This is where I'm going to put all of the artwork for my player. If you want to import files here, there's a couple different ways to do it, but I like to just right click, open in file manager, which is going to open up your dialog. I'm going to grab in my downloads folder this example player sprite that I provided on my itch.io page. Go ahead and copy that, paste it into my player sprite folder. Then when I go back to Godot, you saw a real quick little thinking bar. I've now got a sprite in here. I'm going to just drag that on to the texture of my Sprite 2D object. So just make sure that Sprite 2D selected, put the texture here. So you can see kind of how this character looks. And if you want to hit F5 and run it, you can see he's kind of there up in the corner of the screen. We'll fix that. But this sprite sheet has different frames for our animation. So in order to use this properly in the Sprite 2D panel, you've got an animation section here. And we can tell it how many horizontal and vertical frames are on our sprite. And in this particular sprite, there's 21 horizontal frames. So if I type that one in there, boom, there we go. There's just one single thing. Now there's also a couple other items we need to address here. You'll notice that our character looks blurry. And if you're not doing pixel art, it probably looks fine and looks smooth. But in this case, we are doing pixel art. So we need to fix that. You can change how this is rendered by going to texture and clicking on the filter. And then we could say nearest. That'll make it look nice and sharp like pixel art. But we want that to happen by default. So I'm going to reset that back to inherit. We're going to go into our project and project settings. Underneath project settings, we have textures. And you can see here the default texture filter is linear. We'll just change that to nearest and click close. Boom. And if you're doing a pixel art game, you want to do that. That way all of your textures when you bring them in have that nice crisp pixel art look. Now let's do something here. Let's move our player so that he's not in the corner of the scene. And actually I don't want to move the sprite. I want to click on character body 2D. And if you've got the arrow tool, the select mode highlighted, or the move tool, this is pretty easy. I like the move tool because it shows these little gizmos. But I'm just going to go ahead and zoom out. I'm going to drag my character to the middle of the scene. You see this big rectangle? That's kind of what my camera is looking at. And I can run it. And there we go. The character is going to be smack dab in the middle of the scene. Now this is interesting. When I make it full screen, you see the character's clear up here. He's still tiny. We've got to configure our project to be ready to render this 2D scene in a better fashion. So what I'm going to do is go to project settings one more time. And then underneath display, there's an option or a panel for window. Now you can play around with this, but I've already determined for my project that I want kind of a retro look and I want the pixels to match sizes kind of similar to what they are on, say, Super Nintendo. So I'm going to set the viewport width to 480 pixels and the height to 270 pixels. And then there's a couple other options that we want to change here. One is this mode disabled. We want to set it to viewport. A viewport is ideal for rendering pixel art because it's not going to stretch or scale them. It's going to keep this original viewport width and height. And no matter how big we make the window, it's going to scale to that. So I'm going to go ahead and close my project settings. And then we've got our character. He's outside of the window now. You see how small it is? Let's just go ahead and bring him back to the middle. And then if we run this scene, boom, there we go. Now it's still really small. So there's one last step I'd like to show you. And we can get more into this in future tutorials. But one last thing you want to do Windows so that you can have this pixel art style, but make it a little bit larger. If we click this advanced settings toggle, then we get a few more options on this screen. And you're going to scroll down. Where are you going to scroll down to? Oh, there it is. It's in this first section. Window width override, window height override. You can set anything you want in here. So for now, let's just put 1920. Yeah, by 1080. This is like a 1080p monitor. My resolution is a little bit higher, so this window is still not going to fill the full screen, but that's kind of what I want right now. So once I set that and press F5, there we go. Now my game is rendering in a larger window. You can make this full screen if you want, and it'll keep that aspect ratio. And because we put a specific viewport width and height, you'll notice we get little black bars on the top and bottom or sides, depending on how we resize this window, because that setting is trying to force the game to render in those dimensions. So there we go. We've now got a character. We can display him. He's got a nice crisp pixel art look that we wanted. And the last thing we want to do today is make it so that we can move this around. So there's going to be two important things here. We're going to have to set up our input mappings, and then we're going to have to create our first GD script to control the player. Let's start with the input mappings. If we go to project settings, I'm going here a lot. You could just do all this at once if you know what you're doing. We'll go over to input map, and then we can add actions. You'll notice it looks empty. If you show built-in actions here, you'll see a bunch of actions that are already set up. And we've got things like UI up, UI down. I don't want to reuse these because the names are specifically for UI interactions, and I want to keep that as is. I'm going to just turn off the show built-in actions, and let's just create 4 new actions that we need to make our game work. And I'm going to keep them really simple and call them up, down, left, and right. So let's add up, let's add down, left, and right. We've got our 4 actions there. These aren't going to do anything until we bind an input to each action, and you can change the name if you need to, but next to each action you'll see a little plus symbol. And this is actually really easy. It's saying, okay, what do you want to use for up? I'm going to just press up on the keyboard, and you'll notice that it automatically entered this up physical. It's looking at my key code. I'll just say, okay, good enough, up. We can add one for down. We can add one for left. We can add one to the right. I'm just pressing the key that I want to use for it. Now, one last thing that we should do over here, if you have a gamepad plugged in, this works with a gamepad. I'm going to go ahead and hit plus on the up and press up on my, I've got a PlayStation 4 controller here, and it got the D-pad up. Perfect. I'll go through and do this for each of these. And then if you wanted, you could even add things like your thumbsticks or whatever actions you want. You could even go so far as to add button presses for other things like attack or jump or whatever else you plan to use in your game and set that up now. But since we're not going to use those in today's tutorial, I'm just going to leave it with these four and say close. I want to actually save this player so that I can reuse it. So you'd see how it's in the scene and it's got its own little tree here. Before we start moving the player, and maybe just so that we're prepared for future use, let's go ahead and come to this. Let's take character body 2D and let's rename it to player. And then once we've renamed it, let's right click and choose save branch as scene. It's going to save this player as its own scene so that any work we do on the player, we can just do it in this scene. It keeps it nice and consolidated, and it also makes it reusable if we needed that. You can see because I named the node player, the file name it wants to save it as is already called player. And I'm just going to go ahead and open the player folder, save the scene there, and there, boom, it changed what it looks like here, right? We've got player, it's got this little scene icon. The things below it disappeared, but it's okay, they're still there. And you can see that down here in our file system, the player is saved into this folder. So let's go ahead and open our player. You can double click on it from the file explorer, or if you go back to playground, you can click the little scene button and it'll open it in a new tab. So you can see we've got our playground and our player. Now for the player, I want to fix a couple things here. I just want to come in here, come to player. I want to go to transform. We've moved it to the center. I want to set this back to 0, 0. So I just click that little refresh button because we don't want our player to have some offset based on the screen, right? This scene is just the player and just these little bits of information. We've got our collision shape. We've got our sprite. So we should be good. That collision shape right down there is covered up. I'm actually going to move my player sprite. This isn't super important right now, but I'm going to put his feet right in the middle of that circle. And voila, there we go. So we've got our new player scene. Everything's nice and centered. Then if I move this player, the whole root scene, then everything moves with it. Then, and voila, isn't super important right down there is covered our sprite. Information. We've got our collision shape. We've got our sprite. So we should be good. That collision shape right down there is covered up. I'm actually going to move my player sprite. This isn't super important right now, but I'm going to put his feet right in the middle of that circle. And voila, there we go. So we've got our new player scene. Everything's nice and centered. Then if I move this player, the whole root scene, then everything moves with it. But obviously I can come down here like I just did with the sprite and move it around where I want, and it'll stay in that position in relation to the rest of the scene. Okay, so let's do one more thing in our player folder here. I'm going to create one new folder, and I'm going to call this scripts. This is where I'm going to save all of the GD scripts that are specific to my player. And then in here, I'll right click, click create new, select script, and it's calling it new script. I'm just going to call it player. Let's go ahead and just click create. And then when I expand my scripts folder, you can see there's player GD, and you can see it extends node. Now, if you don't player GD, and you can see it expand my scripts folder, you can see there's player GD. And then when I expand my script create, and then when I expand my scripts folder, you can see there's player GD script. I'm just going to call it player, select script. And then in here, I'll right click, click create new, select script, and it's calling it new script. I'm just going to call it player. Let's go ahead and just click create. And then when I expand my scripts folder, you can see there's player GD, and you can see it extends node. Now, if you don't know much about programming, some of this might seem a little bit over your head, but I want to do a few things to kind of get you set up so that you're ready in the future to be able to make the best use of this code, and hopefully to start introducing some concepts that'll help you learn as we go along. So there's two things we're going to do here. First of all, this doesn't extend node. If you look at our player, I'm going to select it. You see at the top, he's a character body 2D node. And in In order for me to be able to access all of the character body 2D properties and methods, I want Godot to know that that's what I'm working with. So I'm going to change this up here to character body 2D. There we go. And then once that screen, you know you've typed it in correctly, and obviously it had hints you could click. This just lets my script know that this is the type of node that we're controlling. And I'm also going to do something here, type class underscore name, and then we'll provide a name, and I'm just going to call player with a capital P. So this script has a very specific name now that we could reference in the future that works similar to this character body 2D. Anything that we create within this player script, we'll know and we'll have access to from other scripts if needed. So let's see, in here, we're just going to create a couple simple things to get started. Okay, first we're going to make a variable. We're going to call it move speed. And I'm going to type colon, and I'm going to type that it is a float. You don't have to do colon float, but this tells Godot that this is what I want this variable to be used for. It's a float, which means it's a number with decimal places. And I'm just going to put a value in there that I think will be appropriate for my game of 100. And then we could change this move speed to make him go faster or slower. And we'll just leave it at that for now. Now there's two things that were created with our script, and they've got some comments in here to help us understand them. There's a ready function. As you can see, it's called when the node enters the scene tree for the first time. And then there's a process function, which is called every frame. And it passes in or contains this property called delta. And this tells you how much time has passed since the last frame happened. So within our process, we're going to just add some code here to get our character moving. And we're going to do a very simple implementation of making our character move here. And then in the next tutorial, we're going to take this concept of moving our character and how to write our character scripts one step further and create a state machine. But for now, we'll just start with the basics. We want to get the direction that the player is pressing on the keyboard or the joystick.
Oh,
I'm going to go ahead and just...
Thanks for letting me know, brother.
create a new variable in here. var means we're making a new variable. I'm going to call it direction. And I'm going to make a colon and say it's vector2. Vector2 is a variable that contains two numbers, an x and a y. We use this for position, coordinates in 2D space. We also use it for things like velocity, or change in a direction. We're going to start with vector2. We'll just say that it equals vector2 dot 0 to start. Except I'm not supposed to put these little parentheses there. Don't know why I did that. Okay. So there we go. We've got our vector2, vector2.0. That just means it's 0 on the x-axis and 0 on the y. So 0. And I'll show you, if we look at direction, if we type that in here and then type a period, we've got an x coordinate and a y coordinate. That's what we're talking about when we say two vectors or two numbers represented by a single variable, right? It's got an x and a y. So we're going to take our direction dot x. We're going to take the x variable and we're going to set it to, so equals, and then we're going to say input dot get action strength. And then you'll see a few of the things we've added here. There's down, there's left, there's right. Okay. Since this is our x-axis, we'll start with right, and then I'm going to just say minus input dot get action strength, and we'll put left. So what this means here is we're getting the action strength of left and right. If the player is pressing the right arrow on the keyboard, the x is going to be 1, and if they're pushing left, it's going to be -1 because we're subtracting that. And if they're pushing both, it'll be 1 minus 1, we're going to have 0. So if the player is pressing left and right at the same time, it's not going to move left or right, right? It's just going to stay. We'll do a similar thing with direction y. We'll say it equals input dot get action strength, and then we'll say we'll start with down, and then we'll subtract the up. Get action strength. Where is up? There it is. And you could just type it. It's kind of nice to be able to use the arrow keys to find it. Okay, so right now we've got a left and a right strength and an up and a down strength. We're going to take those directions and we're going to use them to move our character. Okay, so now that we've got a direction, it's pretty simple. We need to do two more things. We need to set our velocity, the velocity of our character. This is one of those properties that we get because it's character body 2D. It can have a velocity. We'll just set that to the direction and multiply it by our move speed. If we didn't multiply it by move speed, it would be really slow. And then the one last thing that we have to do in order for this velocity to actually move our character body 2D is we need to include couple lines of code here. So there's another process in Godot that's known as the physics process. So you notice I started typing there. It is physics process. You'll notice the name is similar to process. It just says physics, and that's pretty self-explanatory, I hope. Instead of running every frame, this is called every physics tick, which is going to happen on a fixed rate. So this is independent of frame rate because you don't want your physics happening too fast because it's a little bit more expensive. But in our physics process, we're now going to add one line of code, and it's move and slide. And this is another method that's just built into the character body 2D. And what it essentially does is it tells the character body, take my velocity and move based off of that velocity. We didn't put our script on our player. Okay, here we go. So once we've done this, we should have done this when we created it, but I'm going to drag the player script onto my player. Boom. See how it gets the little scroll? Now it's got a script attached. Now when I press F5 and run the game, I press the keyboard, run my little character down, and there we go. If I try pushing left and right, it stops. I can move diagonally, and voila. So we've got a character. We can move him. He only looks in one direction right now. Kind of cheesy, but we'll fix that. I'll do it next time. So thanks for following along.
Oh shit. Oh man, I got 2 minutes left.